The stagecoach rocked violently as it hit another rut in the dusty road, jolting Winifred Eaton awake with a start. Her hands instinctively tightened around the small leather satchel in her lap, all she had left of her former life. Dust filtered through the windows, coating her once fine traveling dress as the California sun beat down mercilessly overhead. This journey to Downieville would either be her salvation or her grave, and she wasn't entirely sure which prospect terrified her more. The year was 1858, and the Sierra Nevada foothills of California were still reeling from the gold rush that had transformed the region just a decade earlier. Downieville had sprung up along the banks of the North Yuba River, a boomtown that had managed to survive when others had faded into ghost towns once the easy gold played out. It was far enough from San Francisco, far enough, Winifred hoped, from the men who sought her. "First time to Downieville, miss?" the elderly woman seated across from her asked, her weathered face creased with a kind smile. Winifred nodded, attempting to smooth the wrinkles from her skirt. "Yes, I'm hoping to start anew there." "Plenty do," the woman replied, knowingly. "Mining town's settled some, but still rough around the edges. You got family waiting?" "No," Winifred said, her voice barely above a whisper. "No family." The woman's eyes softened with something like pity. "Well, Mabel's boarding house is clean and respectable. Tell her Agnes sent you, and she might even give you the room with the view of the river." Winifred managed a grateful smile, though her stomach churned with anxiety. 22 years old and completely alone, running from shadows that seemed to stretch across the entire country. The small pouch of coins sewn into her petticoat would only last so long. When the stagecoach finally rolled into Downieville, the sun was beginning its descent behind the mountains. The town was larger than she'd expected. Wooden buildings lined the main street, with homes cascading up the steep hillsides. The roar of the river provided a constant backdrop to the sounds of civilization. Piano music from the saloons, the clang of the blacksmith's hammer, voices calling greetings across the street. "End of the line, folks," the driver called, jumping down to open the door. Winifred gathered her skirts and stepped carefully onto the wooden boardwalk, clutching her satchel in one hand and a small trunk, her only other possession, in the other. The evening air was cool compared to the stifling heat of the coach, carrying the scent of pine from the surrounding mountains. "Need help with that trunk, miss?" a deep voice asked. She turned to find herself facing the broad chest of a tall man. Looking up, she met eyes the color of the California sky, set in a sun-bronzed face partially shadowed by a wide-brimmed hat. He couldn't have been more than 30, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble and shoulders that spoke of a life of physical labor. Winifred hesitated. In San Francisco, she'd learned the hard way not to trust easily, but something about the man's direct gaze made her incline her head slightly. "If you could direct me to Mabel's boarding house, I would be most grateful." "Better than that," he said, lifting her trunk as if it weighed nothing. "I'll walk you there myself. Town can be confusing for newcomers." He touched the brim of his hat. "Name's Kier Lawson, by the way. Most folks just call me Kier." "Winifred Eaton," she replied, the name feeling strange on her tongue. She'd been using it for less than a month, having abandoned her real name when she fled San Francisco. Kier nodded towards the sloping street that led uphill. "Mabel's is just up this way." "You planning to stay in Downieville long?" "As long as I can," she said vaguely, following him up the incline. Her corset made the climb difficult, and she was embarrassingly short of breath by the time they reached a 2-story clapboard building with a small sign identifying it as Mabel's boarding house for respectable ladies. A plump woman with iron gray hair pulled into a severe bun opened the door before they could knock. "Another one from the evening coach?" she asked, eyeing Winifred critically. "Well, you look decent enough. No men allowed past the parlor, mind you." "Evening, Mabel," Kier said, setting down the trunk. "Miss Eaton here comes recommended by Agnes." Mabel's expression softened marginally. "Any friend of Agnes is welcome. That'll be $2 a week, includes breakfast and dinner." Winifred nodded, reaching for the coins in her pocket. "Thank you. I'm hoping to find work quickly." "What sort of work?" Kier asked, still standing on the porch. "I can sew," Winifred said, "and I've worked as a shopkeeper's assistant before." She didn't mention her years as a governess to one of San Francisco's wealthiest families. Those references would only lead danger to her door. Might be in luck, Kier said. Sanders over at the Mercantile lost his wife to influenza last spring. Store's been suffering without a woman's touch, from what I hear. Could mention you tomorrow if you'd like. That would be most kind, Winifred said, surprised by the offer. Mabel made a shooing motion with her hands. That's enough matchmaking on my porch, Lawson. The girl just got to town. Kier chuckled, touching his hat again. Wasn't matchmaking, Mabel, just being neighborly. Good evening, Miss Eaton. Hope Downieville treats you well. As he turned to leave, Winifred called after him. Thank you, Mr. Lawson. He glanced back, a half-smile on his face. Just Kier, miss. Everyone calls me Kier. With that, he disappeared down the darkening street, leaving Winifred with the strangest sensation of loss, as if she'd just missed grasping something precious. Well, come in before you catch your death, Mabel said, picking up the trunk herself. Men like that one are trouble for a young woman alone. Best keep your distance. Winifred followed her inside, wondering what kind of man would help a stranger without asking for anything in return, and whether she dared hope that Downieville might truly offer the fresh start she desperately needed. By morning, Winifred had memorized every detail of her small room. The faded floral wallpaper, the uneven floorboards that creaked near the window, the way the first light of dawn cast the iron bedframe shadow across the braided rug. Sleep had been elusive, her mind replaying the journey and worrying over what might come next. Breakfast was a simple affair in the dining room downstairs: cornbread, thick-cut bacon, and strong coffee shared with 4 other boarders. All were women working in town. A schoolteacher, 2 seamstresses, and a young widow who played piano at the respectable hotel 2 streets over. You'll want to avoid the east end of town after dark, the schoolteacher, Miss Pearson, advised as she passed the pot of jam. The mining camps are that way, and while most of the men are decent enough, there's always a few who get rowdy when they've been drinking. Thank you, Winifred said, spreading jam on her cornbread. I hope to find employment today. A Mr. Lawson mentioned the Mercantile might be hiring. The widow, Mrs. Bailey, raised her eyebrows. Kier Lawson? The rancher. He didn't mention his occupation, Winifred replied. Tall gentleman, blue eyes. That's him, one of the seamstresses confirmed. Has that spread about 5 miles outside town. Raises horses, mostly. Decent sort. Keeps to himself except when he's in town for supplies. Or when there's trouble, Mrs. Bailey added. Sheriff calls on him when extra help's needed. He was a Texas Ranger before he came west, so they say. This information intrigued Winifred, but she kept her expression neutral as she finished her breakfast. Armed with directions to Sanders' Mercantile, she made her way down the hill into the heart of town. Downieville was coming alive for the day, shopkeepers sweeping their storefronts, miners heading toward the river claims, women hanging laundry in the morning sunshine. Despite the activity, Winifred couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. She quickened her pace, reminding herself that paranoia had kept her alive this long. The Mercantile was easy to find, occupying a prime location on the main street. A bell tinkled as she entered the store, which smelled pleasantly of coffee beans, leather, and the faintly sweet scent of fabric bolts. A harried-looking man with spectacles was attempting to help a miner select boots while simultaneously measuring flour for a waiting customer. Be with you in a moment, miss, he called, spilling flour across the counter. Winifred stepped forward. Please, let me help. She deftly measured the flour into a paper sack, tied it with string, and handed it to the waiting woman. Will there be anything else today, madam? The customer looked surprised but pleased. 3 sticks of peppermint for my boys, if you'd be so kind. Winifred located the candy jar, wrapped the peppermint sticks in paper, and completed the transaction, recording it in the ledger open on the counter. By the time the store emptied, she'd served 4 more customers, straightened a display of tinned goods, and swept the floor. Mr. Sanders, for that was indeed who the bespectacled man was, stared at her in amazement. Well, I don't know who you are, miss, but I'm inclined to thank you, he said, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. Winifred Eaton, she introduced herself. I arrived yesterday. Mr. Lawson mentioned you might be in need of assistance in your store. Kier sent you? Sanders looked her over more carefully. You've worked in a shop before, I take it? Yes, sir. In San Francisco. It wasn't exactly a lie she had helped in shops, just not as a paid employee. I'm quick with figures and familiar with inventory management. Sanders didn't hesitate. Consider yourself hired, Miss Eaton. 6 days a week, 8 till 6, with an hour for lunch. $5 a week to start. More if you prove as valuable as you appear to be. Relief flooded through her. With room and board at $2 weekly, she could save the rest. Perhaps in a few months, she might even have enough to move further east if necessary. When would you like me to start? She asked. Right now? If you're amenable, Sanders said. Store's been a shambles since my Martha passed. Need a woman's touch for the fabrics and notions, and I can't keep up with the ledgers anymore. And so began Winifred's new life in Downieville. The work was straightforward enough, though the hours were long. She quickly learned the inventory, reorganized the crowded shelves, and won over the customers with her efficiency and quiet courtesy. Sanders seemed almost pathetically grateful for her help, and by the end of her first week, he'd increased her wages to $6. It was on her second Saturday in town when she saw Kier again. She was arranging a display of new calico prints when the bell jangled and he ducked through the doorway, removing his hat as he entered. Sunlight caught in his dark blonde hair, showing strands of gold among the darker hues. Morning, Miss Eaton, he said, nodding to her. Looks like my recommendation worked out. It did indeed, Mr. Lawson, she replied, feeling inexplicably flustered. I'm very grateful. He smiled, and she noticed a small scar near the corner of his mouth that deepened with the expression. Just Kier, remember? And no need for gratitude. Town needs decent folk. Before she could respond, he turned to Sanders. Got that order ready, Hiram? Need to get back to the ranch before noon. Sanders bustled from behind the counter. All packed up for you, Kier. Got those special nails you wanted from Sacramento, too. While the men discussed the order, Winifred found herself studying Kier surreptitiously. In the daylight, she could see that his eyes weren't just blue but had flecks of gray in them, like the river stones she'd seen children playing with. He moved with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin, though she noted the slight stiffness in his left shoulder, an old injury, perhaps. When Sanders went to the storeroom for the nails, Kier turned back to her. How are you finding Downieville, Miss Eaton? Please, call me Winifred, she said, surprising herself. And I find it hopeful. Something in her tone made his expression soften. Sounds like you needed some hope. Their eyes met, and for a moment, Winifred felt as though he could see straight through the carefully constructed facade she'd built. It was terrifying and oddly liberating. The moment broke when Sanders returned. Kier loaded his supplies into saddlebags and a small wagon outside, tipped his hat to Winifred, and was gone. That evening at dinner, Mrs. Bailey was particularly animated. Did you all hear about the excitement at the Nugget Saloon last night? She asked, butter knife poised over her bread. A man rode in from Nevada looking for someone. Caused quite a stir. Winifred's hand froze midway to her water glass. What sort of someone? Miss Pearson asked. A woman, apparently, Mrs. Bailey continued, oblivious to Winifred's sudden pallor. Wouldn't say who, just that she'd stolen something valuable from his employer. Offered a $100 reward for information. Sheriff Donovan told him to move along if he didn't have a proper warrant. Good for the sheriff, one of the seamstresses said. We don't need bounty hunters stirring up trouble. The man said he'd be staying at the hotel for a few days, Mrs. Bailey added, in case anyone had information. Winifred excused herself early, claiming a headache. In her room, she pulled out her satchel from under the bed and opened the false bottom she'd sewn into it. The papers were still their documents that proved Theodore Blackwell, one of San Francisco's most respected businessmen, was involved in everything from claim jumping to human trafficking. Documents that his men had killed to recover. She'd been naive, working as a governess in his household, believing his charming facade. By the time she discovered the truth, she was already in too deep. She'd fled with the evidence, intending to take it to the authorities only to discover that Blackwell's influence reached even into the ranks of law enforcement. Now she was Winifred Eaton, not Willa Evans, the name she'd been born with. But if Blackwell's men had traced her to Downieville, her time there was already running out. For 3 days, Winifred jumped at every sound of the mercantile's bell. She scrutinized each unfamiliar customer, looking for signs they might be the man from Nevada. The constant vigilance left her exhausted, dark circles forming under her eyes despite her attempts to hide them with cold compresses. On Wednesday morning, her fears materialized in the form of a well-dressed man with a pencil-thin mustache who entered the store just before noon. His gaze swept the interior before landing on her, and the gleam of recognition in his eyes confirmed her worst fears. Well, he said, approaching the counter where she stood frozen. If it isn't Miss Willa Evans. Or are you calling yourself something else these days? Sanders looked up from his ledger, confusion on his face. Sir, can I help you find something? The man ignored him, his attention fixed solely on Winifred. Mr. Blackwell sends his regards, he said quietly. He's been quite concerned about your sudden departure, and about certain papers that went missing around the same time. Winifred's throat went dry. I don't know what you're talking about, sir. My name is Winifred Eaton. Of course it is, the man said with a cold smile. Just as my name is John Smith. I'll be staying at the hotel. I suggest we have a private conversation about returning Mr. Blackwell's property before things become unpleasant. The threat hung in the air between them. I think the lady said she doesn't know you. Came a familiar deep voice from the doorway. Kier stood there, his imposing frame blocking much of the light from outside. Unlike the city-dressed Mr. Smith, Kier was in his working clothes denims, boots caked with dust, a faded blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up revealing corded forearms. He wore no gun that Winifred could see, but something in his stance suggested he didn't need one to be dangerous. Smith turned, irritation flickering across his features. This is a private matter. Not in a public store, it isn't, Kier replied mildly, but his eyes had hardened to flint. He moved further into the room, positioning himself casually between Winifred and the visitor. Hiram, didn't you say you needed help unloading that wagon that just came in? Sanders, clearly sensing the tension, nodded quickly. Yes, indeed. Miss Eaton, if you wouldn't mind. Grateful for the escape, Winifred hurried around the counter and through the back door into the storeroom. Through the thin walls, she could hear the murmur of voices but couldn't make out the words. A few minutes later, the bell jangled, and Kier appeared in the storeroom doorway. He's gone, he said. For now. Winifred sagged against a barrel of flour. Thank you. Kier studied her, his expression unreadable. Want to tell me what that was really about? She shook her head, tears threatening. I can't. Can't or won't. When she didn't answer, he sighed. All right, but if you're in trouble, there are people here who might help. Me included. Why? She asked, genuinely bewildered. You don't even know me. A corner of his mouth lifted. I'm a decent judge of character, Miss Eaton. And whatever that man wants from you, I doubt you're the one in the wrong. He glanced back toward the store. You should probably get back to work before Hiram has a conniption. Man can't measure a yard of fabric to save his life. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving her to wonder why a former Texas Ranger turned rancher would put himself between her and danger without asking questions. That evening, Winifred penned a resignation letter to Sanders. It wasn't fair to bring trouble to his door or to anyone else in Downieville. She would leave on the morning stage, head further into the mountains, perhaps even cross into Nevada territory where Blackwell's reach might be weaker. She was sealing the envelope when a soft knock sounded at her door. Opening it cautiously, she found Mabel standing there with a concerned expression. There's someone to see you downstairs, the landlady said. I told him it's after hours for visitors, but he was quite insistent. Winifred's heart raced. What does he look like? Tall fellow, hat full of trail dust. Said his name's Lawson. Relief washed over her. I'll come down. Kier was waiting in the small front parlor, hat in his hands. He looked out of place among the delicate furniture and crocheted doilies, but he rose politely when she entered. I apologize for the late hour, he said, but that man from the store is asking questions all over town, showing a sketch that looks remarkably like you, though he's calling you by another name. Winifred sank into a chair. I need to leave town. Tonight, if possible. That would only confirm his suspicions, Kier said. And he's not alone. Saw two more men arrive on the evening stage, rough-looking types who went straight to meet him. Fear clutched at her chest. Then I'm trapped. Kier seemed to come to a decision. Not necessarily. My ranch is 5 miles outside town. Remote, defensible. You could stay there until we figure out who these men are and what they want. We, she echoed. Sheriff Donovan's a friend, Kier said. If these men are bounty hunters operating without proper authority, he'll run them out of town. If there's something else. He shrugged. We'll deal with that too. Winifred shook her head. You don't understand. These aren't just bounty hunters. They work for Theodore Blackwell. Kier's expression hardened at the name. The shipping magnate from San Francisco? The same. And what would a man like that want with a shop girl from Downieville? Winifred took a deep breath. Because before I was a shop girl, I was a governess in his household. And I learned terrible things about his business dealings. Things he'd kill to keep secret. Kier was silent for a long moment, studying her face. You have proof? She nodded. And you ran, rather than taking it to the authorities. I tried. Winifred said, the bitterness of the memory still fresh. The police captain I spoke to was on Blackwell's payroll. He tried to have me detained. I barely escaped. Kier rubbed a hand across his jaw. So you came north? Changed your name? Yes. And I thought I'd covered my tracks. She twisted her hands in her lap. I never meant to bring danger to this town, or to you. That's why I need to leave. Running hasn't worked so far, Kier pointed out. Maybe it's time to try something else. He leaned forward. Come to my ranch. It's secluded, and I have men working for me who know how to handle trouble. We can send word to Sheriff Donovan, figure out a plan. Why would you risk yourself for me? She asked again. Kier's expression softened. Because a long time ago, someone took a chance on me when I was in trouble. And because I've been watching you these past weeks. You're honest, hardworking, kind to people who can't do anything for you in return. That tells me all I need to know about your character. His words touched something deep inside her, a place that had been cold and afraid for so long. Still, she hesitated. These men are dangerous. Kier smiled then, a wolf smile that reminded her of his ranger past. So am I. An hour later, Winifred was riding double with Kier on his horse, her small bag of essentials tied behind the saddle. They'd slipped out the back of the boarding house, avoiding the main streets where Blackwell's men might be watching. The night was clear, stars sprawling across the sky in a brilliant tapestry. Under different circumstances, Winifred might have found the closeness of their bodies, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath them, almost pleasant. As it was, every shadow among the trees seemed to hide potential danger. Not much farther, Kier said, his voice low near her ear. There's a creek we have to ford, then it's about a mile to the ranch house. Won't they check your property when they realize I'm gone? Eventually, he agreed. But they'll have to find it first, and it's not on the main road. Plus, my foreman Miguel isn't fond of uninvited visitors. He was with the California Battalion during the war with Mexico, knows how to handle a rifle. The mention of additional protection should have been reassuring, but Winifred only felt a deepening sense of guilt. I never wanted to involve others in my problems. Sometimes we don't get to choose our battles, Kier replied. Only how we fight them. They crossed the shallow creek, water splashing around the horse's legs, and continued through a stand of pines. When they emerged into a small valley, Winifred could make out the shapes of buildings ahead, a substantial main house, and several outbuildings, with corrals visible in the moonlight. As they approached, a dog began to bark. A moment later, the door to the house opened, spilling lamplight onto the porch. A figure with a rifle stepped out. It's me, Miguel, Kier called. The rifle lowered. Little late for a social call, boss. We have a situation, Kier said, dismounting and then helping Winifred down. Her legs were stiff from the unaccustomed ride, and she stumbled slightly. Kier's hand at her elbow steadied her. Miguel was a compact man with graying hair and a face weathered by sun and wind. He took in Winifred's presence with a raised eyebrow, but asked no questions as Kier led her inside. The house was surprisingly comfortable, with sturdy furniture, woven rugs on the plank floors, and shelves lined with books. A fire burned low in the stone fireplace, taking the chill from the night air. Miguel, this is Miss Winifred Eaton from Downieville, Kier said. She'll be staying with us for a while. Miss Eaton, Miguel Vasquez, my foreman and the best horseman in 3 counties. Miguel inclined his head. Señorita, you are welcome. Thank you, Winifred said, still feeling overwhelmed by how quickly her situation had changed. There are men looking for her in town, Kier continued. Working for Theodore Blackwell. Miguel's expression darkened. The one who tried to claim your father's land. Kier nodded grimly. The same. This new information startled Winifred. You have history with Blackwell? My father's ranch in Texas bordered land Blackwell wanted for a railroad venture. Kier said. When my father refused to sell, there were accidents, a mysterious fire, cattle that died from poisoned water. My father was shot by rustlers who took nothing. His voice was controlled, but Winifred could hear the old anger beneath it. I couldn't prove Blackwell was behind it, but I know he was. I'm so sorry, she whispered, understanding now why he'd been so quick to believe her. It was a long time ago, Kier said, but I've kept tabs on Blackwell over the years. The man leaves destruction in his wake, but he's careful always as others do his dirty work. Miguel set his rifle by the door. I will tell the men to be watchful. Jorge and Luis are good shots. Double the night watch, Kier agreed. And send Jorge into town at first light. Have him find Sheriff Donovan, no one else, and bring him here. As Miguel left to carry out these instructions, Winifred sank onto a chair near the fire, suddenly exhausted. The events of the day, the nighttime ride, and the revelations about Kier's connection to Blackwell had drained what little energy she had left. You should rest, Kier said, noticing her fatigue. I have a spare room upstairs. It's nothing fancy, but it's clean. He showed her to a small bedroom with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a chest of drawers. The window overlooked the valley, though in the darkness she could see little beyond her own reflection in the glass. Thank you, she said, turning to face him in the doorway. For everything. I don't know how I'll ever repay you. Kier shook his head. I'm not looking to be repaid. Get some sleep, Winifred. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what to do about Blackwell and his men. After he left, Winifred sat on the edge of the bed, mind racing despite her exhaustion. For the first time since fleeing San Francisco, she wasn't facing her problems alone. The realization brought tears to her eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, and of something else she wasn't ready to name. Sheriff Donovan arrived shortly after noon the next day. He was a barrel-chested man with a drooping mustache and shrewd eyes that missed nothing as Kier introduced Winifred. So you're the young woman Smith is looking for, he said, settling his bulk into a chair at Kier's kitchen table. He's spinning quite a tale in town about you being a thief and worse. None of it is true, Winifred said firmly. Didn't think it was, Donovan replied. Man like that, all fancy clothes and city ways, coming to a place like Downieville with a story that changes depending on who he's talking to, sets my teeth on edge. He looked at Kier. Now, suppose you tell me what's really going on. Winifred glanced at Kier, who nodded encouragingly. Taking a deep breath, she told her story, her employment with the Blackwell family, the documents she'd discovered while looking for a misplaced letter in Theodore Blackwell's study, her failed attempt to alert the authorities, and her flight north. I have proof, she finished, retrieving her satchel from the bedroom. From the false bottom, she extracted a packet of papers. Shipping manifest showing human cargo. Correspondence about removing obstacles to his business interests. Records of bribes to officials. Donovan examined the documents, his expression growing grimmer with each page. This is serious business, Miss Eaton. Evidence of crimes that would hang a man if it reached the right authorities. That's why his men want me silenced and these papers destroyed, she said. The question is, who can we trust with this information? Kier asked. If Blackwell has law enforcement in his pocket in San Francisco. Donovan stroked his mustache thoughtfully. I have a cousin who works for a judge in Sacramento. Federal judge, not local. Man of impeccable reputation. If anyone can ensure these papers reach the right hands, it would be him. Hope sparked in Winifred's chest. How soon could you contact him? I can send a telegram today, Donovan said. But it would be best if you stayed here until we know more. Smith and his friends were asking very pointed questions about you this morning. Did they seem to know she might have left town? Kier asked. Not yet. I put it about that you headed up to your lumber claim yesterday and wouldn't be back for a week. Should buy us some time. Kier nodded. Good thinking. One more thing, Donovan said, rising to leave. I took the liberty of posting Luis outside your property entrance. Told him to come fetch me if any strangers show up. After the sheriff departed, Winifred and Kier were left alone in the kitchen. Miguel had gone to supervise the men working with the horses, and the house was quiet except for the ticking of a clock on the mantel. Thank you for believing me, Winifred said, breaking the silence. Most people wouldn't have. Kier looked up from the coffee he was pouring. Like I said, I'm a good judge of character. He handed her a cup. Besides, I've wanted a reason to bring Blackwell down for years. You've given me that chance. If your sheriff's cousin comes through, perhaps there will finally be justice, she said, warming her hands on the mug. And then what will you do? Kier asked. The question caught her off guard. She'd been so focused on surviving, on staying ahead of Blackwell's men, that she hadn't thought much beyond that immediate goal. I don't know. Continue working, I suppose. Find a place where I can build a life. Here in Downieville? There was something in his tone that made her look at him more closely. Perhaps. I've grown fond of the town. And its people. Their eyes met, and that strange connection she'd felt in the mercantile returned stronger this time. Kier seemed about to say something more when a dog's frantic barking shattered the moment. Kier was on his feet instantly, moving to a cabinet from which he withdrew a revolver. Stay inside, he instructed, checking the weapon before heading to the door. Winifred followed him to the window instead. Outside, she could see Miguel running toward the house from the stables. In the distance, dust rose from the road riders approaching at speed. 3 riders, Miguel reported as he burst through the door. Coming fast. Luis is not at his post. Kier's expression hardened. Get Jorge and the others. Rifles only, I want to see who it is before anyone starts shooting. Miguel nodded and disappeared back outside. Kier turned to Winifred, his face grim. I need you to go upstairs, he said. There's a small room off the main bedroom storage space with a hidden door. If anything happens, get in there and stay quiet. I won't hide while you put yourself in danger for me, she protested. This isn't up for debate, Kier said, his voice sharper than she'd ever heard it. Then, more gently, please, Winifred, I can't focus on what needs doing if I'm worried about you being in the line of fire. Reluctantly, she nodded and climbed the stairs. From the upper window, she watched as Kier, Miguel, and 3 other ranch hands positioned themselves around the yard, weapons at the ready. The riders came into view, Smith and 2 rough-looking men, all armed. They reined in their horses at the sight of the waiting reception. Mr. Lawson, Smith called, his voice carrying clearly in the still afternoon air. I believe you have something that belongs to my employer. Don't know what you're talking about, Kier replied evenly. This is private property. I suggest you turn around and head back to town. One of Smith's companions spat on the ground. We know the girl is here. Hand her over, and we'll be on our way. No need for things to get messy. There's no girl here, Kier said. Just a lot of men with rifles who don't take kindly to trespassers. Smith's expression hardened. We found your man by the road. He'll live, but he might walk with a limp from now on. That's us being restrained. Don't test our patience further. Winifred's blood ran cold at the news of Luis's injury. This was her fault, all of it. These men wouldn't hesitate to kill Kier and everyone on the ranch to get to her. The documents were important, yes, but were they worth human lives? Before she could think better of it, she hurried back downstairs and out onto the porch. I'm here, she called, ignoring Kier's furious expression. Let these people be. Your quarrel is with me. Smith smiled, the expression never reaching his eyes. Miss Evans, how good of you to join us. Mr. Blackwell will be pleased. I'll come with you, Winifred said, stepping forward. But only if you promise no harm comes to anyone here. Winifred, don't. Kier growled, moving to block her path. She placed a hand on his arm. I can't have more blood on my hands, she whispered. Not yours. A noble sentiment, Smith said. However, I'm afraid it's not just you we're after. Mr. Blackwell is particularly interested in recovering certain papers he believes you've stolen. They're not here, she lied. I sent them to Sacramento already. To a federal judge. Smith's smile faltered slightly. You're bluffing. Am I? Sheriff Donovan left here not 2 hours ago with the documents. By now, they're safely in the hands of the law. It wasn't entirely false. The sheriff had indeed promised to contact his cousin. She only hoped the bluff would work. Smith exchanged glances with his companions. Doubt had crept into their expressions. Even if that's true, Smith said finally, Mr. Blackwell still wants a word with you. To discuss the consequences of betraying his trust. She's not going anywhere with you, Kier said, his voice dangerously quiet. He had positioned himself slightly in front of Winifred, his stance protective. Smith sighed dramatically. I was hoping to avoid unnecessary violence. But if you insist. He nodded to one of his men, who began to raise his rifle. A shot cracked through the air before the man could aim. The rifle flew from his hands, and he clutched his bleeding fingers with a howl of pain. Sheriff Donovan emerged from the trees to one side of the yard, rifle still raised. "Next one goes somewhere more permanent," he called. "Drop your weapons, all of you." For a tense moment, it seemed Smith might resist. Then, calculating the odds for armed ranch hands, Kier, and now the sheriff against their remaining 2 guns, he slowly raised his hands. "This isn't over," he said as Donovan's deputy, who had appeared from the other side of the clearing, disarmed him. "Mr. Blackwell has a long reach." "Not as long as the federal marshal who's on his way from Sacramento," Donovan replied. "Got confirmation by telegraph before I rode out here." "Judge Harrington is very interested in those documents Miss Eaton preserved." Very interested indeed. Relief washed over Winifred, so powerful she might have fallen if Kier hadn't steadied her with a hand at her waist. "You came back," she said to the sheriff. Donovan nodded. "Got word from my cousin right away. He said to keep you safe at all costs. The evidence you have could bring down not just Blackwell, but half the corrupt officials in San Francisco." As the sheriff and his deputy led the prisoners away, Winifred turned to Kier. "I'm sorry I disobeyed you. I couldn't bear the thought of you being hurt because of me." Kier's expression was a complex mixture of anger, relief, and something deeper. "Don't ever do that again," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "When you stepped out there, I thought my heart would stop." The intensity of his gaze made her breath catch. "Why?" Instead of answering with words, he drew her against him and lowered his mouth to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, a question more than a demand. When she responded, her arms sliding around his neck, it deepened into something that spoke of fear faced and overcome, of connection found in unlikely circumstances, of possibilities neither had dared to hope for. When they finally broke apart, Miguel and the other ranch hands had discreetly disappeared, leaving them alone in the yard. "I have enemies looking for me," she warned, her hands still resting against his chest. Kier smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "They'll have to go through me first." Marshal James Harrington arrived from Sacramento 3 days later, bringing with him a contingent of deputies and official warrants for Theodore Blackwell's arrest. He was a tall, austere man whose initial skepticism melted away as he reviewed Winifred's evidence. "This is extraordinary," he said, seated at Kier's dining table with the documents spread before him. "Blackwell has been suspected of illegal activities for years, but he's been too careful, too well-connected for anyone to build a case against him." He looked up at Winifred with newfound respect. "Until now. What happens next?" she asked. "I'll return to Sacramento tomorrow and dispatch agents to San Francisco immediately. Blackwell will be arrested, along with several officials implicated in these papers." Marshal Harrington gathered the documents carefully. "You've done a great service, Miss Eaton, or should I say Miss Evans?" "Eaton," she said firmly. "I prefer Winifred Eaton now." The marshal nodded. "As you wish. We'll need your testimony eventually, of course. But that can wait until Blackwell is in custody." "Will she be safe?" Kier asked, his hand finding hers under the table. "Smith and his companions are securely locked up in the Nevada City jail," Harrington assured them. "And Blackwell won't know we're coming until it's too late. That said, I'd recommend Miss Eaton remain somewhere secure until we've completed the arrests." Kier's fingers tightened around hers. "She can stay here for as long as necessary." After the marshal left, accompanied by Sheriff Donovan, Winifred and Kier walked out to the porch. The late afternoon sun bathed the valley in golden light, the shadows of the mountains stretching long across the pastures. In the nearest corral, young horses frolicked, their movements fluid and free. "Beautiful, aren't they?" Kier said, nodding toward the horses. "Wild stock that we've gentled. That black one there, he fought the bridle for weeks. Now he's the most reliable mount on the ranch." Winifred smiled, understanding the parallel. Sometimes what appears wild just needs patience and trust. Kier turned to her, leaning against the porch railing. "Speaking of trust, there's something I've been meaning to ask you." Her heart quickened. "Yes." "When this is all over, when Blackwell is behind bars and you're truly safe, what will you do? Will you go back to San Francisco? Or, she prompted when he hesitated. "Or would you consider staying? Here, I mean, in Downieville. Or," he gestured to the ranch around them. Here, warmth bloomed in her chest. Are you offering me a position, Mr. Lawson? As your housekeeper, perhaps? A smile tugged at his lips. Not exactly. Then what exactly? Kier took both her hands in his. I know it's fast. We've known each other barely a month. But sometimes when something is right, you just know it. He took a deep breath. I'm not offering you a position, Winifred. I'm offering you a partnership. A life. With me. Tears pricked at her eyes. Here, you don't have to answer now, he said quickly. Take all the time you need. I just wanted you to know that when you decide where your future lies, there's a place for you here. If you want it. Winifred looked out over the ranch, at the mountains beyond, at the life Kier had built here. Then she looked at the man himself, strong, honorable, someone who had risked everything to protect her when he barely knew her. I don't need time, she said softly. I've spent my whole life being careful, doing what was expected, following the rules. And where did it get me? Running for my life, alone and afraid. She squeezed his hands. For once, I want to follow my heart instead. And my heart says yes. The kiss they shared then was a promise of protection, of partnership, of a future neither had dared to imagine before fate brought them together. Winifred moved into the ranch house permanently the following week, after a proper farewell to Mabel and her fellow boarders. The arrangement raised some eyebrows in town, but Sheriff Donovan's endorsement and Hiram Sanders' vocal support helped smooth the waters of potential scandal. News came from Sacramento that Theodore Blackwell had indeed been arrested, along with 2 police captains and a judge from San Francisco. The evidence Winifred had preserved proved damning, and additional witnesses came forward once Blackwell's intimidating presence was removed from the equation. By winter, with snow dusting the mountains and the ranch quieter during the cold months, Kier and Winifred were married in a small ceremony at Downieville's only church. Sheriff Donovan stood as Kier's best man, while Mabel, who had grown surprisingly fond of Winifred, served as matron of honor. Miguel surprised everyone with his gift, a beautifully tooled saddle for the bride, who had taken to riding with unexpected enthusiasm. Mrs. Lawson, Kier murmured that night as they lay before the fire in their bedroom. How does it sound? Perfect, Winifred replied, nestled against his chest. Though I've had so many names lately, I might not answer to it right away. He chuckled, his fingers tracing patterns along her bare shoulder. I have a lifetime to remind you. Spring brought new foals to the ranch and news that Theodore Blackwell had been sentenced to 20 years in prison for his crimes. The man would be an old man before he saw freedom again, if he survived incarceration at all. With the threat finally behind her, Winifred flourished. She took over the ranch's bookkeeping, expanded the vegetable garden into a proper kitchen garden, and even began helping Miguel train the younger horses. The quiet strength she'd developed during her months on the run transformed into confidence as she embraced her new life. By the following winter, she was heavy with child, their first baby due just after Christmas. The nursery, once Kier's study, had been transformed with a cradle he'd built himself and quilts sent by the ladies of Mabel's boarding house. What shall we name him? Kier asked one evening as they sat by the fire, his hand resting on her swollen belly. Him? You seem very certain it's a boy, Winifred teased. Ranch needs a son, he said with a wink. Though a daughter would be just as welcome. If it's a boy, I thought perhaps James, after Marshall Harrington. He did change our lives, in a way. Kier nodded thoughtfully. James Lawson. It has a good sound. And if it's a girl, maybe Maria, after Miguel's late wife. He's been like family to us. He'd be honored, Kier agreed. Though he'd probably cry and then deny it vehemently. Winifred laughed, then gasped as the baby gave a particularly strong kick. I think either way, this little one is going to be as strong-willed as his father. God help us if he has his mother's courage, Kier replied, pressing a kiss to her temple. We'll never have a moment's peace. Their son, for Kier's prediction proved correct, was born on a clear, cold January night in 1860, with Miguel's sister-in-law serving as midwife. James Miguel Lawson entered the world with a lusty cry that, according to Miguel, could be heard all the way to the stables. As Winifred held their son to her breast, Kier sat beside them on the bed, wonder and love plainly written on his face. Look what we made, he whispered, touching the baby's tiny fist with one finger. Our little miracle, Winifred agreed. Born from danger, but destined for peace. Do you ever regret it? Kier asked suddenly. Taking those papers? Running away? All the fear and danger. Winifred considered the question seriously. How could I? If I hadn't, I would never have come to Downieville. Never have met you. She looked down at their son. Never have had this perfect life we're building. Kier's eyes shone with emotion. When you walked into my life, something broken in me started to heal. I didn't even know how alone I was until suddenly, I wasn't anymore. We saved each other, Winifred said simply. As their son grew, so did the ranch. Kier's reputation for quality horses spread, bringing buyers from as far as San Francisco and even Oregon territory. The house expanded with a new wing, and Miguel's nephew joined the permanent ranch hands. In the spring of 1862, their daughter Maria was born, completing their family. She had her mother's delicate features, but her father's determined blue eyes, a combination that promised both beauty and strength as she grew. Life settled into a rhythm of seasons, the bustling activity of spring with its foaling season and garden planting, summer's long, hot days of training horses and preserving the garden's bounty, autumn's golden beauty and preparations for winter, and winter's quiet time of family gatherings around the fire. Each year on the anniversary of Winifred's arrival at the ranch, she and Kier would ride to a particular spot overlooking the valley, the place where they had stopped briefly on that moonlit night of her escape from Downieville. There, they would picnic and reflect on how far they had come from those dangerous days. I never thought I could be this happy, Winifred confessed on one such anniversary, as they watched 7-year-old James race his pony across the meadow below, 5-year-old Maria struggling to keep up on her smaller mount. No, Kier asked, his arm around her shoulders. At 40, there was silver at his temples now, but his eyes were as clear and keen as ever. No, she said. Happiness seemed like something that happened to other people. Safety was just a word. And love. She turned to face him. Love was something I'd given up hoping for. And now, he touched her cheek gently. Now I know better, she said, leaning into his touch. I know that sometimes the greatest dangers lead us to the greatest joys. That running away can actually be running towards something better. That a chance meeting in a dusty town can change everything. Kier smiled, the same smile that had first caught her attention all those years ago. That a woman with enemies can find her greatest protector, and that a lone cowboy can find a family he never expected, she added, returning his smile. Below them, James had stopped his pony to wait for his sister, reaching out to adjust her grip on the reins, so like his father in his instinct to protect. We did well, didn't we? Kier said, following her gaze. We did, Winifred agreed. And we still are. As the sun began its descent behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the valley that had become their home, Kier pulled her close for a kiss that still held all the promise of their first. I have enemies looking for me, she had warned him once, a lifetime ago. They'll have to go through me first, he had replied. And together, they had faced those enemies and all the challenges that followed, building a life richer and more fulfilling than either could have imagined alone, a testament to courage, to second chances, and to the transformative power of love found in the most unexpected circumstances.